Just to give you a heads up for this afternoon, because of course we have Love to Learn today. So for our lab time, since it's a little difficult to find labs that you can do in high school for the reproductive system, that's a little bit of a joke. We have a good case study, which I'm looking forward to. I think that you will enjoy this. It's actually 3 parts. It's a fairly long one. I'm giving you heads up now that I'm going to be dividing you into groups of different people than you normally work with. Okay? Time to mix you up a little bit. I'm going to give you group assignments. You're going to have to look up some things. You're not going to understand all the pieces that are in this case study. You're going to have to look up some medical terminology and understanding what they're talking about. Again, completely, thoroughly capable folk you are. So we'll talk more about that during Love to Learn time. Today, we are finishing up, not finishing up, we'll finish up anatomy-wise with the ladies and then continue discussing oogenesis. We might get a little bit further than that. We'll see how things are going. I'm tired, I have to admit, so I'm not like clipping along today. I'm slowly moving. Okay, so taking us back to where we left off yesterday, and I do need your attention, please. I appreciate it. We went through surface anatomy, moving from anterior to posterior, where we have the labia majoris, the labium minis or minimus, or labia major and minor, the outer coverings, the outer folds. We have the clitoris, which again in this picture shows it just being this small little tube of erectile tissue, but I'll show you other pictures that will show you the depth, the largeness of it. Continuing to move posterior, you have the symphysis pubis. So I just don't want to talk over you. Okay? Lots of little conversations. Just stay here with me. I appreciate it. The symphysis pubis comes into play significantly when we talk about birthing, the actual pregnancy and birth process. So they put that there. Here is the urethra, again coming down from the bladder. The vagina going up to the uterus with the uterine tubes and the ovaries attached to it. Again, terrible picture to see that. Keep continuing posterior, you have the anus with the rectum and large intestine. And that basically covers it there. We went through this picture as well, looking from the anterior side now. Instead of a sagittal view, we're looking at the anterior view. From the vagina moving up, the cervix, right, that opening. The uterus with its various layers, endometrium, myometrium, perimetrium. Endo means inside, myo means muscle, peri means around, outside. Okay, so again, anatomists are not clever. They just basically, in Latin, tell you what it is. Here are the uterine tubes, again the fallopian tubes, another name for them, into the ovaries themselves. And we'll talk more about these different pieces of how the follicle works, the secondary oocyte, etc. You notice that there's actually space between the ovary and the tube. On the left here, it looks like they're attached, like a head of cauliflower or something, but they're actually not. There's open space there. And so you need these little fimbriae, little fingers, to kind of grab and gently pull the egg into that infundibulum, which is like the funnel. That's literally what it means. Down into that uterine tube. Have you ever heard of something called an ectopic pregnancy? This would be where that egg actually doesn't implant in the uterus, it actually implants in the fallopian tube and starts to grow. This is a problem, right? Because the fallopian tube is not designed to house an egg. So that baby usually will have to be aborted. They'll have to remove that egg from that spot. Yeah. I'm pretty sure it's an abortive piece. I don't think they can take and reattach it, at least not that I'm aware of. Same thing, all right. We talked about the cervix, just giving you that view of the cervix. And I have a good slide that shows this in our pregnancy piece. But again, during childbirth, or before childbirth actually, in the process of labor, is basically stretching and thinning the cervix out. And it goes from about the size of a Cheerio to about the size of a bagel. That's 1 centimeter to 10 centimeters. And that's how it stretches out. This is the piece I was telling you, the picture of what the clitoris actually looks like. So this was a revelation for scientists really over the last, let's say, 20, 30 years that they've been studying female reproduction. And again, it goes back to, are you comfortable that for an awful long period of time, women in positions of power were significantly underrepresented? That's like the understatement of the century. So the amount of research done into male reproductive systems and male sexuality was humongous. I mean, everything's on the outside, pretty easy to see. Whereas the ladies, it's a lot more subtle. And so for a long time, they simply thought, hey, the clitoris was just this little piece at the top that, again, you can actually see from the outside. But what they found is that no, there actually is, the clitoris is this whole organ that almost surrounds the vagina. You can see the pictures that they have kind of superimposed underneath here to show you, here's the urethra, here's the vaginal opening, here's the actual glands or the head of the clitoris on the top. But actually you have this erectile tissue, these nerve endings that go all the way around. It's not just simply this very top piece, which I thought was very interesting. I didn't know this for quite a while. Questions there? And again, just giving you anatomy pieces. They're not in your diagrams. This is from the images PowerPoint that is up on Schoology. Any questions anatomy-wise? Because again, I'm ready to move from there into actually how the pieces are working and the different processes involved. Any questions anatomically? And again, we haven't even gotten to those pieces yet, but I'd be glad to. I mean, so obviously the penis would be inserted into the vagina, and that would be where the ejaculation would occur. So that would come up past the cervix into the uterus, from the uterus then up into the fallopian tubes. I would say simply because the bladder is right there too. You know, that's just the general exiting point on the body. You know, there's only so much real estate to deal with. For the guys, it's all one tube, but you have these two separate tubes for the ladies, so yeah. That does play a role in the fact that ladies get urinary tract infections much more frequently than guys do. Okay, because again, you've got these two tubes that are basically sharing an exit. So you get more cross-contamination. That's not really a good way of putting it, but you know what I mean? There are bacteria in the vagina that can, without too much difficulty, make that transfer over into the urethra. Other pieces there? Okay. So I'm switching back over here, talking about the ovaries. And again, these are these ovoid structures, ovaries, oval, right? Sounds very similar. You've got, again, a medulla and an outer cortex, just like so many different pieces in our bodies. The medulla being inside, cortex being on the outside. The medulla is connective tissue, blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and nerves. The cortex is where actually the work is being done. That's where those follicles are, and it's actually covered by a cuboidal epithelial. So like I was saying yesterday, you are born with all of the eggs you will ever have as ladies. And we call these primordial follicles. In other words, like early follicles, the ancestral follicles, right? Primordial makes you think of like the ooze that, you know, supposedly everything came from, right? So these eggs are not mature, right, by any means. They are just the beginnings of the egg that at some point in the future will mature. And those follicles have an oocyte, that's the actual egg, that are surrounded by these follicular cells. And as we'll talk about, both of these are very important. The egg obviously is important, it's the egg, but the follicular cells actually play a huge role in this reproductive system. So early in the development, that primary oocyte undergoes meiosis, right? So in that process of being developed, even in utero, as a fetus, these guys are starting to grow, right? And then it's halted. Like they don't reach maturity until you actually get to puberty, right? So again, you're beginning that process of here are the cells that are going to be your eggs, but they're not actually able to be produced. And again, that is the beginning of the menstrual cycle. Your period would be the time that, hey, I'm actually releasing eggs. You could get pregnant on that very first time you released an egg. It would be quite bad luck, but you could do it. You could do it. So what is oogenesis? Again, an oocyte is the actual medical name for the egg. They don't call it an eggocyte. And you do say two O's, oocytes. Strange, but it's Latin. So beginning at puberty, some of those oocytes are stimulated to continue that meiosis process that they started. And again, meiosis is different than mitosis, right? Mitosis is two separate, completely identical reproductions. Meiosis is splitting, right? That now I've got two. Oops, sorry, they're haploid. Meaning what? What do you mean by being haploid? Means they're being halved, right? What do you mean by being halved? What's being halved?
Oh,
couldn't you, sure, but what part in particular? The chromosomes, right? Why? Well, that's what causes it, sure, the meiosis. So that what now? A zygote, that's a fertilized egg. Why is that important? So you have a baby. So that the egg and the sperm can meet. And if they both had 46 chromosomes, you'd end up as some freaky something with 92 chromosomes. It would be weird. Right? You need these pairs, the 32 of each, 23 of each, to come together to make this new person. So again, you are a combination of your mother and your father together.
So it all ends up with 46?
All total will be 46. You have 46, I have 46. But these cells are the only ones in your body that don't. They only have 23.
So you say how many comes into the
Yes, 23. A zygote will end up with 46. So here's this process, that primary oocyte, which does have 46, that then goes through that meiotic division to give you two separate 23ers. One of them becomes the egg. The other becomes what's called a polar body. And we'll talk a bit more about these. That these produce hormones is the big thing that these guys play a role in. They are producing a lot of these reproductive hormones from the ovaries. We'll talk more about that. And so here they're showing you that, hey, here's where the sperm actually comes in, and you get a zygote that has 46 at the end. Because 23 from the guy, 23 from the girl, come together to make your 46. Pretty cool? So this process of maturation, the process of that follicle being able to release an egg, goes something like this. At puberty, you have follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH, remember it comes from the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, right? It initiates this maturation, which causes the follicle to enlarge. The follicular cells proliferate, in other words, start reproducing, start expanding. And the fluid-filled cavity forms in that secondary follicle. The mature follicle has the actual egg, right? And is surrounded by this zona pellucida, which is attached to the corona radiata. Again, all these Latin terms that are basically just describing what they look like. Okay? Zona pellucida means, yeah, that clear area around the egg. The corona radiata, that's like the outer covering that looks kind of like the sun's radiating out. Are you with me? And all of that is surrounding that actual egg, that secondary oocyte, because it started out as a primary oocyte way back here, right? But then it divided into the follicule and the secondary oocyte, and we're moving out. So this is the egg that will actually be fertilized, that will leave the ovary and go into the infundibulum, right, with the fimbriae pulling it along, and go into the uterine tube. And every single month it goes through this process of maturing. From these primordial follicles, over time, maturing into this egg that is ready to be released. So ovulation is that process of actually releasing the egg from the ovary. And this is what happens each month. One ovary, usually left side 1 month, right side the next month. They just kind of go back and forth between each other. Some months both will go. That would be the opportunity if you have twins in your family, right? There are occasions that you will spit out 2 eggs at once. Those would be fraternal twins if they were both fertilized, right? Sometimes you also have, once the egg is actually fertilized, that it then splits, the zygote splits, and that would be what identical twins are, because those are genetically the same people. No. No. No, like double recoil or something like that. No, just, yeah. There are a whole host of things that play into, it's called amenorrhea. There's actually a name for it. It can be stress. It can be exercise. It can be based on how much nutrition you're getting. Like if for some reason you're not eating a whole lot. It can become because of different sicknesses. You to not have a period, to like miss your period. If it happens more than a month or 2 in a row, that's when folks will say, oh, you better go get a pregnancy test because you never know. Again, but if you haven't had sex, there's no way you're pregnant, right? Unless you're Mary. And none of us are. Okay? Okay. Can you imagine that conversation? It's very sacrilegious, but can you imagine that conversation? No, Mom, I swear it was the Holy Spirit. It wasn't. It sounds kind of weird, right? But true. But true. Probably won't go over well with your mom if you try it. I'm just telling you, it won't. It won't happen. Okay. So again, that oocyte is released, and the again, if it's not fertilized, it will degenerate, which is kind of strange. It basically passes out of your body. It won't necessarily just break down in there. And you have that follicle that's left over. Oh boy, it doesn't even talk about that at all. Interesting. And again, you have this follicle that is left here, that they even give it different names. The corpus luteum, the corpus albicans. Again, they'll talk more about that when we get to the hormones, I guess. I thought we were going to cover it now, but I guess not. Here's the anatomy slides. We've covered basically all of these. And again, that point that I made about the infundibulum with the fimbriae that are basically drawing that egg into the uterine tube when it's released from the ovary. Yep, already talked about all these pieces here. The vagina, it is muscular. It is a smooth muscle tube, so it does have some contractile ability. This is one of the things that happens during orgasm, is this kind of contraction of these different muscles. And it's covered again by the hymen. We talked about that. And you have, again, these 3 layers, almost like everything in our body seems to have these 3 layers of the inner wall, that's the mucosal, like mucus, like the fluid there, it is mucus, but mucus is such a general name. We think of just like snot as mucus, but This is mucus. These vaginal fluids are mucus. The stuff in your ear is mucus, right? Sweat mucus, right? The stuff around your joints is actually a mucus, the synovial fluid. So don't worry about the fact that it's called mucus. It's not means you've got snot there. So mucus layer, muscle layer, and then that outer fibrous layer, that outer coating, outer protective area. You've seen this picture. The external pieces, again, we've already talked about all of these pieces. And again, the labia is corresponding to the scrotum. Remember the picture that I showed how they develop? They come from the same tissue, right? It's this covering, coating tissue. And again, the labia minora, the clitoris. On the vestibule, there's a space enclosed by the labia minora. So, again, everything has been given names. A vestibule is like the opening. So, have you ever heard vestibule, the vestibule of a house? It's a very old-fashioned kind of term. It basically means the foyer, like where you first come in to a house. And again, many of our houses aren't so grand and huge that they have these kind of things. But you think about maybe a big house that you've been into, and you have this place where you first walk in, or a church. How about that? The church foyer, where you first come in. That's called the vestibule. That's an old name for that. So this space that is enclosed by the labia minora, and then the vaginal opening. There's actually this little bit of space, and they're calling that the vestibule. And again, this is where those glands are. Remember the Skene's glands and the Bartholin's glands that basically correspond with the bulbourethral glands, and the prostate gland and the seminal vesicle, right, that are producing this lubricative fluid. Is that a word? Lubricative? The lubrication fluid? Questions there? Whew. We're about ready to be done talking, eh? Oops, that was what I meant to do. I had to go to the next one. This is just a brief little quick something. There's much more detail in your textbook, and we'll talk more about this. Erection, lubrication, orgasm. So, during periods of sexual stimulation, the erectile tissues in the clitoris and in the vestibular bulb, they're talking about this area around the vagina, become engorged with blood. They actually become erect. They become filled with blood, just like the penis does. You get these secretions of, and again, it says mucus, but this would be lubricative fluid, this lubrication that is produced by the vagina to, again, allow the penis to come in and there to be friction without actually, hurting. And then during that orgasm, again, you get this contraction of both the actual vaginal walls, the perineum, so the muscles around there, the uterus. All of these things are contracting in this kind of rhythmic fashion, and this is what that. So that obviously there's the large feelings of pleasure, and it feels good for this to happen. But you have also these contractions. For the guys, the same thing. The contraction of these areas is what produces this release of the fluid, of the ejaculation. Any questions there? Okay, I can't bear to go through hormones today. We're going to have to pause for that. So let me put my stop here, because we could go through it.